If you're watching this, then I'm already gone. For 28 years, my family protected a lie.
Rain falls gently over rows of black umbrellas as mourners gather outside St. Andrew's Cathedral. Church bells echo across the city. Luxury cars line the street. Television crews speak in hushed voices. To the world, today is the funeral of billionaire Richard Walker, a man who built an empire, a man who inspired millions, a man remembered as one of America's greatest businessmen. But the people standing closest to his casket know something the cameras don't. Richard Walker didn't spend his final years fearing death. He feared the truth, because hidden somewhere beneath decades of wealth, power, and respect was a secret so devastating it could destroy the Walker family forever. Hours from now, inside the mansion he spent a lifetime building, his final message will leave every member of his family frozen in silence. Before anyone receives a single dollar, return my daughter. The room will fall silent, because everyone in that house believes Richard Walker had only 2 children. So, who was the missing daughter? Why had no one ever heard her name? And why did Richard wait until after his death to tell the truth? Rain had been falling since before sunrise. Not the violent kind that demanded attention. Just a slow, endless rain. The kind that seemed determined to wash old memories from the streets of Manhattan. Outside St. Andrew's Cathedral, hundreds of mourners stood quietly beneath black umbrellas. Business leaders, politicians, judges, employees whose lives Richard Walker had changed, friends who had known him for decades, and reporters, watching every movement, waiting for the smallest glimpse of the family behind one of America's most powerful fortunes. Inside the cathedral, sunlight struggled through the stained glass windows. The air carried the scent of polished wood, old stone, and fresh lilies. A choir softly sang Amazing Grace. Every note echoed through the sanctuary. At the front sat Margaret Walker, perfectly dressed in black, pearls around her neck, hands folded neatly in her lap. Not a tear had fallen from her eyes. Anyone watching would have called her strong. Only Margaret knew the truth. She wasn't fighting grief. She was fighting fear. 3 nights before Richard died, she had stood outside his hospital room. The door had been slightly open. She hadn't heard every word. Only one sentence. "Promise me they'll hear everything." Those words had followed her ever since. Beside her sat Daniel Walker, the eldest son, the future CEO, or at least, the man everyone believed would become the future CEO. His phone buzzed silently inside his jacket. Messages from board members, investors, news agencies. The business world had already begun looking beyond Richard Walker. Daniel believed the future belonged to him. He had no idea. His father had written a very different future. A few seats away, Claire Walker quietly wiped tears from her face. She wasn't thinking about board meetings or inheritances. She was remembering the final conversation she shared with her father. Richard had looked unusually tired. He had squeezed her hand tighter than ever before. "Claire, one day, you'll understand why I wasn't the father you deserved." She had laughed softly, told him to stop talking like that, promised he'd recover. Now, those words had become a goodbye. Near the back of the cathedral sat Benjamin Hayes, a retired judge, Richard's closest friend for more than 4 decades. Resting against his leg was an old leather briefcase. Inside it, a sealed envelope, a flash drive, and enough evidence to rewrite the history of an entire family. Benjamin looked toward the casket, then quietly whispered, "I kept my promise, old friend." Outside, the rain continued to fall. unaware that somewhere across the city, a woman named Evelyn Carter was about to walk into a story that had begun on the day she was born. She just didn't know it yet. The funeral ended just after noon. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy, as though the city itself refused to believe Richard Walker was gone. One by one, black luxury cars pulled away from St. Andrew's Cathedral. Not toward hotels, not toward offices, but toward the Walker estate. The mansion had witnessed birthdays, Christmas dinners, business celebrations, and weddings. Today, it would witness something far more dangerous. The truth. The wrought iron gates creaked open. As each car disappeared down the long tree-lined driveway, reporters gathered outside the entrance. Camera shutters clicked relentlessly. News helicopters circled overhead. Every network wanted the same story. Who would inherit Richard Walker's fortune? No one, not even the reporters chasing headlines, could have imagined that the inheritance would become the least important story of the day. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere had changed. The laughter that once filled its halls had long since faded. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors. Portraits of generations of Walkers watched silently from the walls. The house felt less like a home, and more like a museum built to preserve memories no one wanted to revisit. The staff moved quietly. No one spoke above a whisper. Even they sensed that today would change everything. Benjamin Hayes walked slowly toward Richard's private library. His old leather briefcase never left his hand. Richard had entrusted him with many things over the years. Business contracts, personal letters, confidential legal documents. But never anything as heavy as this. He paused before the carved oak doors, closed his eyes, and remembered their final conversation. 3 nights earlier. Hospital ambience. A heart monitor beeped steadily. Richard Walker looked smaller than Benjamin had ever seen him. The illness had stolen his strength, but not his determination. Benjamin pulled a chair beside the bed. "You should be resting." Richard managed a faint smile. "I've rested long enough." He glanced toward the window, where snow-white clouds drifted across the evening sky. "I've made a terrible mistake." Benjamin remained silent. Richard continued. "For 20 years, I convinced myself there would always be more time. More time to explain. More time to find her. More time to fix what I allowed to happen." His voice broke. "But time doesn't wait for regret." Benjamin leaned forward. "Richard, if you're asking whether it's too late." Richard looked at him with tired eyes. "I already know the answer." A long silence settled between them. Then Richard reached toward the bedside drawer. Inside was a small black flash drive. "I recorded everything." Benjamin accepted it carefully. "The journals, the evidence, the names, they're all there." And Benjamin. His old friend looked up. Richard whispered the words that would become a promise. "If I don't make it, don't protect my family. Protect the truth." Benjamin closed his hand around the flash drive. "I give you my word." Present day. Benjamin opened the library doors. Daniel, Claire, Margaret, Richard's attorneys, the company's board members, and a handful of trusted advisors had already taken their seats. No one noticed Benjamin's trembling hands. Only Evelyn Carter did. She stood quietly near the back of the room, beside the firm's senior partners. Officially, she was there only as legal counsel. Unofficially, something about the room made her uneasy. She couldn't explain it. It felt as though she had stepped into a memory she'd never lived. Margaret kept her eyes fixed on the fireplace. She knew Richard better than anyone. If he had prepared a recorded message, It meant he intended to reveal something. Something he had hidden even from her. Her fingers tightened around the handkerchief in her lap. Please, don't do this. Across the room, Claire noticed an old photograph sitting on the mantel. Richard, much younger, holding baby Daniel, standing beside Margaret. Claire frowned. Something felt strange. There were no baby photographs of herself anywhere in the mansion. She had always assumed they had been lost during a renovation years ago. Now, for the first time, she wondered if they had disappeared for another reason. Daniel rose from his chair. As acting CEO of Walker Holdings, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. His voice was calm, measured, confident. Today we honor my father's memory. And afterward, we'll proceed with the reading of his final wishes. Benjamin quietly interrupted. No. Every head turned. The reading comes first. Daniel frowned. My father always followed protocol. Benjamin looked directly into his eyes. Today, he asked us not to. A heavy silence settled over the room. Daniel slowly sat back down. For the first time in years, someone had openly challenged his authority. Benjamin placed the black flash drive onto the conference table. It looked ordinary, small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. Yet inside it lived 28 years of buried truth. He connected it to the large television mounted above the fireplace. The screen remained black. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Benjamin looked around the room one last time, then quietly spoke. Richard asked that no one interrupt his message. He pressed play. The screen flickered to life. Richard Walker appeared. Older, thinner, but unmistakably determined. He looked straight into the camera. Then, straight into the eyes of the family he loved. And finally said the words that would change every life in that room forever. If you're watching this, then my time is over. The library fell completely silent. Even the old grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking. Richard managed a faint smile. I've spent my entire life teaching people how to build a fortune, but I never learned how to repair a broken family. His gaze drifted briefly toward the window. Rain tapped gently against the glass. If I had one more day, I wouldn't spend it in another boardroom. I wouldn't sign another contract. I'd spend every second searching for the child I failed. Confused glances spread across the room. Claire slowly leaned forward. Daniel frowned. Margaret's fingers tightened around her handkerchief. Richard lowered his eyes. For the first time, he looked less like a powerful businessman and more like a grieving father. There is something I have hidden, not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I believed I could fix it before I died. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were filled with tears. I was wrong. A painful silence followed. Then, Richard spoke the words that would shatter every life in the room. Before anyone receives a single dollar from my estate. He paused. His voice almost disappeared. Return my daughter. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the entire mansion had forgotten how. Daniel blinked. Claire stared at the screen. Several board members exchanged bewildered looks. One of the attorneys instinctively reached for his notebook, then stopped. Margaret slowly lowered her head. Her face had lost every trace of color. Richard continued. Some of you are hearing those words for the first time. Others have been afraid of them for 20 years. Benjamin closed his eyes. He had heard this recording before. It still broke him. Richard's breathing became heavier. My daughter was born 20 years ago. I held her for 11 minutes. 11 minutes. That have haunted every day of my life. Claire covered her mouth. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She remembered every birthday her father had quietly disappeared for a few hours. Every anniversary he had insisted on spending alone. Every Christmas when he seemed grateful, yet strangely incomplete. She understood now. He had never stopped counting the empty chair at his table. Richard looked back into the camera. If you're angry with me, you have every right to be. I should have fought harder. I should have searched sooner. I should have been her father, instead of hiding behind my work. Across the room, Evelyn stood perfectly still. She had never met Richard Walker. Yet something about his voice stirred an ache she couldn't explain. It felt strangely familiar, like hearing a melody she'd known as a child, but forgotten with time. She quietly dismissed the thought. It made no sense. Richard took another slow breath. Benjamin. Benjamin looked up. My friend, you know what to do. Benjamin nodded silently. I do. Richard smiled faintly. Then his expression grew serious once more. There are people in this room who already know pieces of the truth. I pray they finally find the courage to tell the rest. His eyes lingered on the camera, as though he could somehow still see them. Margaret. The room froze. Margaret's shoulders trembled. I loved you. I never stopped loving you. But love cannot survive where truth is buried. A tear escaped Margaret's eye. For 20 years. Those were the words she had feared hearing. Richard turned his attention again. Claire. Never stop asking questions. Daniel. Never confuse power with integrity. Then, he smiled. A small, gentle, fatherly smile. And to my little girl. His voice broke. I don't know your name anymore. I don't know where life has taken you. You may never even see this message. But if somehow, someway, these words find you, please know, there has never been a single birthday, a single Christmas, or a single sunrise when I wasn't searching for you in my heart. The tears now flowed freely down his face. I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. He reached toward the camera, as if trying to hold the hand of a daughter beyond his reach. Wherever you are, I have always loved you. The recording ended. The screen faded to black. No music. No voices. Only silence. The kind of silence that follows a truth too heavy for words. Then, a chair scraped against the polished wooden floor. Daniel stood abruptly. His face was pale. This is impossible. No one answered him, because deep inside, everyone already knew. Impossible things don't leave behind tears. They leave behind the truth. No one spoke. For what felt like an eternity, the library remained frozen. Richard Walker's face had disappeared from the screen. Yet his words still lingered in the room. Before anyone receives a single dollar, return my daughter. The silence became unbearable. Then, Daniel Walker pushed back his chair so suddenly it slammed against the polished wooden floor. This is absurd! His voice echoed through the library. My father was gravely ill. He wasn't thinking clearly. No one answered. Benjamin Hayes slowly removed the flash drive from the television. He held it carefully, as though it carried something far more valuable than data. It carried a dying man's truth. Daniel turned toward him. You knew. Benjamin met his gaze. Yes. And you said nothing? I made a promise. Daniel laughed bitterly. So this was your plan? To humiliate my family after my father's funeral? Benjamin didn't raise his voice. I came to honor my friend. The truth is what he asked me to protect. Claire remained seated. She couldn't stop hearing one sentence. I held her for 11 minutes. 11 minutes. How could 11 minutes haunt a man for 20 years? She looked toward her mother. Margaret hadn't moved. She stared into the cold fireplace, as if afraid to look anyone in the eye. Claire whispered, Mom! No response. Mom! Margaret finally blinked. Her lips trembled, but no words came. Across the room, Evelyn Carter quietly gathered her legal files. This wasn't her family's tragedy. She shouldn't even be here. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to leave. Richard's final apology had stirred something inside her. Not recognition. Not memory. Just sorrow. The sorrow of a father who had loved someone he couldn't find. She had handled countless estate disputes. Families torn apart by money, greed, resentment. But this wasn't about an inheritance. It was about loss. Benjamin stepped to the center of the room. There is more! Every eye turned toward him. Richard instructed me to continue only if everyone remained present. Daniel scoffed. I'm leaving. You are free to. Benjamin's voice remained calm. But if you walk out that door, you forfeit your right to hear the rest of your father's final instructions. Daniel stopped. His hand rested on the brass doorknob. Slowly, he let it go. Benjamin opened his weathered leather briefcase. Inside rested a thick folder secured with a faded red ribbon. The ribbon had yellowed with age. 20 years. Benjamin untied it carefully. The first document was a birth certificate. The second, a hospital admission record. The third, a nursing report covered in handwritten corrections. Claire leaned forward. What am I looking at? Benjamin slid the papers across the table. Evidence. Daniel barely glanced at them. Old paperwork proves nothing. Perhaps, Benjamin replied. But altered paperwork tells a very different story. Evelyn stepped closer. As legal counsel. May I? Benjamin nodded. She examined the documents with practiced precision. Within moments, something caught her attention. The signatures. She frowned. They don't match. Benjamin folded his arms. Keep looking. She turned another page. The attending physician's initials had been altered. Another page. The newborn identification number has been rewritten. Another. There are missing pages. She looked up slowly. This wasn't a filing error. Benjamin nodded. No. It was deliberate. The room grew still once again. Someone had rewritten history. Margaret suddenly stood. Enough. Everyone turned. I will not sit here while my husband's memory is dragged through endless speculation. Benjamin's expression softened. No one is dragging Richard's memory. He spent 28 years trying to restore it. Margaret's composure cracked. You don't understand what happened. Benjamin answered quietly. Then help us understand. She looked around the room. At Daniel. At Claire. At Evelyn. For one brief moment, it seemed she was finally ready to speak. Instead, she turned away. I can't. She walked toward the door. Claire called after her. Mom! Margaret stopped, but never looked back. Some truths were still too heavy to carry. That evening, Rain returned to Manhattan. Claire sat alone in her father's private study. The room smelled of cedarwood and old books. Everything remained exactly as Richard had left it. His reading glasses, his fountain pen, an unfinished chess match, even the coffee cup that had long since gone cold. She ran her fingers across the desk. I miss you, Dad. The words barely escaped her lips. As she reached to close one of the drawers, it refused to shut completely. Something inside was blocking it. Curious, she pulled it open again. Her fingers searched the back of the drawer. Then, they touched metal. A tiny silver key, hidden beneath the wood with old tape. Claire frowned. What were you hiding? She looked across the room. Behind Richard's favorite landscape painting hung an antique wall safe. Her heartbeat quickened. She crossed the room, inserted the key, and turned it. The lock clicked open. Inside, there was no cash, no jewelry, no company secrets. Only two things: a worn leather journal and a tiny pink knitted baby sock. Claire stared at them, confused, heartbroken, afraid. She reached for the journal. On the first page, Richard had written just one sentence. If you found this, you're finally asking the right questions. Claire slowly lifted her eyes. Outside, lighting flashed across the dark Manhattan sky. Somewhere beyond that storm, the answers had been waiting for 28 years. Claire stood motionless before the open safe. The tiny pink baby sock rested in her palm. It was impossibly small. Time had faded its color, but not its meaning. Beside it lay the worn leather journal. Its edges were cracked, its pages yellowed. The kind of book that had been opened, closed, and cried over 1,000 times. Claire carried both to Richard's desk. She hesitated. Some part of her felt guilty, as though opening the journal meant crossing into a place her father had never intended anyone else to enter. Then she remembered his words. If you found this, you're finally asking the right questions. She slowly turned the first page. Claire, if you're reading this, then I wasn't strong enough to finish what I started. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Even in writing, it felt as though her father was sitting across from her. There are things every parent hopes their child never has to carry. This became one of yours. She turned the page. Richard's handwriting remained neat, careful, almost painfully deliberate. The happiest day of my life became the day I began losing everything. 20 years earlier, St. Catherine's Medical Center. The maternity ward overflowed with flowers. Friends filled the hallways. Business partners arrived carrying gifts. Richard Walker couldn't stop smiling. He held his newborn daughter against his chest. She wrapped her tiny fingers around one of his. The nurse laughed softly. I think she already knows her father. Richard smiled. I hope she always does. He kissed the baby's forehead, then looked at Margaret. We should tell everyone her name. Margaret forced a smile. Let's wait until morning. Richard nodded. He never imagined morning would never come. Back in the present, Claire wiped away another tear. She turned another page. The handwriting changed. The words became hurried, uneven, almost frantic. When I woke, my daughter was gone. The hospital said there had been complications. Then they said there had been a paperwork mistake. Then they said I should stop asking questions. Claire's breathing became heavier. No parent should ever have to write those words. Across the city, Evelyn sat alone in her apartment. She poured herself a cup of tea, but never drank it. Richard's voice continued echoing in her mind. Wherever you are, I have always loved you. She quietly shook her head. Why couldn't she stop thinking about a man she'd never met? She reached for a family photo sitting beside the window. Michael, Sarah, and herself. 3 smiling faces. A lifetime of love. She smiled. Whatever tragedy had happened to Richard Walker, it had nothing to do with her. Or so she believed. Meanwhile, Benjamin Hayes drove through the rain toward a quiet apartment building on the edge of Manhattan. Apartment 4C. He climbed the narrow staircase slowly. When the door opened, an elderly woman greeted him. The moment she saw his face, her smile disappeared. "Benjamin, it's time, isn't it?" Benjamin nodded. "Yes." Eleanor Brooks looked down at her trembling hands. "I prayed this day would never come. So did Richard." She stepped aside. "Come in." Inside the small apartment, time seemed frozen. Old photographs lined the shelves. A faded nurse's cap rested inside a glass display case. Benjamin noticed something familiar. A framed photograph from St. Catherine's Medical Center, taken 20 years earlier. Doctors, nurses, newborns. One face had been circled in blue ink. A baby? Benjamin looked closer. "Is that?" Eleanor nodded. "The only photograph I secretly kept." Benjamin swallowed hard. "You knew she survived." Eleanor closed her eyes. "I knew. She was taken." Back at the Walker estate, Claire reached the final page of Richard's journal. A folded envelope slipped onto the desk. Across the front, Richard had written, "To the daughter I never stopped searching for." Claire picked it up carefully. She didn't open it. She couldn't. Those words belonged to someone else. Someone still out there, waiting without even knowing it. She placed the letter back inside the journal, then noticed something tucked beneath the back cover. A business card. Its edges were worn from years of being handled. On the front, Eleanor Brooks, former head maternity nurse, St. Catherine's Medical Center. On the back, Richard had written just 3 words. "She remembers everything." Claire's heart skipped. She grabbed her coat. The next morning, rain still clung to the streets as Claire parked outside the aging hospital. Most of the original building had been renovated. Modern glass towers surrounded the old maternity wing. But one corridor remained untouched. Quiet, forgotten, almost hidden from the rest of the hospital. Claire walked slowly down the hallway. Old black and white photographs covered the walls. Retired doctors, nurses, hospital celebrations. She stopped. One photograph had slipped slightly inside its frame. She straightened it. Behind it, another photograph had been hidden. Her breath caught. The image showed the maternity staff gathered 3 days after Richard's daughter disappeared. Everyone smiled at the camera. Doctors, nurses, administrators, and standing near the center, Margaret Walker. Claire stared at the photograph. Her father had always believed Margaret never returned to the hospital. But there she was, smiling. 3 days later, the sound of a cane tapping against the floor echoed behind her. Claire turned. An elderly woman stood at the end of the corridor. Silver hair, kind eyes, a hospital identification badge still clipped to her sweater. It read, Eleanor Brooks. She looked at Claire for a long moment, then spoke the words she had carried for 20 years. "I've been waiting for someone brave enough to ask." The old maternity corridor had long since fallen silent. Fresh paint covered the walls. Modern equipment had replaced the machines Eleanor Brooks once worked beside. But memories had a way of surviving renovations. Claire stood frozen. The elderly nurse studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled sadly. "You have Richard's eyes." Claire swallowed. "You knew my father." Eleanor nodded. "I knew the man before grief turned him into a legend." She slowly walked toward an empty waiting bench. "My knees don't let me stand for long anymore." Claire joined her. Neither woman spoke. Sometimes, the hardest truths needed a moment before they could breathe. Eleanor looked down the quiet hallway. I've replayed that night in my mind, every single day for 28 years. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. I remember the smell of antiseptic, the sound of newborn babies crying, the nurses changing shifts. It was supposed to be an ordinary night. She closed her eyes. But ordinary nights don't haunt people forever. 28 years earlier, St. Catherine's Medical Center. Just after midnight, a storm rolled across Manhattan. Lightning flashed beyond the maternity windows. Richard Walker had finally fallen asleep in the Father's Lounge after refusing to leave the hospital for nearly 2 days. Margaret remained inside her private recovery room. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten. She simply stared at the bassinet beside her bed. Inside, her newborn daughter slept peacefully. Eleanor smiled as she checked the baby's blanket. "She's beautiful." Margaret forced a smile. "Yes, but beautiful things don't always make life easier." Eleanor frowned. She didn't understand the remark. Not then. Back in the present, Claire leaned forward. "My father believed the baby disappeared." Eleanor looked at her. "No, she didn't disappear. She was taken." The words echoed through the empty corridor. Claire felt her heartbeat quicken. "By who?" Eleanor drew a slow breath. "I didn't know that night, but I know now," she continued. "Just after 1 in the morning, I saw your mother leave her room. She wasn't alone." Claire stared. "Who was with her?" "The hospital administrator, Harold Whitmore. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the maternity ward, but there he was." The flashback returned. Harold Whitmore quietly unlocked a restricted records office. Margaret stood beside him. Her face was pale. Fear had replaced every trace of confidence. "You promised no one would get hurt." Harold adjusted his tie. "No one will." Margaret looked toward the nursery through the glass. "I don't want her harmed. I just—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Harold spoke calmly. "When morning comes, everyone will believe the child died during complications. You'll have your family, and Richard will eventually move on." Margaret closed her eyes. She wanted to believe him. Desperate people often believe the lie that hurts them most. Back in the corridor, Claire whispered, "My mother believed Evelyn was dead?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "That's what Harold told her. He lied. He lied to everyone." Claire felt tears welling. "So Dad searched, because he never believed it." Eleanor smiled through her own tears. "Richard refused to sign the death certificate." Claire looked up. "He refused?" "He said." Eleanor's voice softened. "Bring me my daughter, or bring me proof she is gone. Until then, I will never stop looking." Claire covered her mouth. She could almost hear her father's voice saying those words. Eleanor reached into her handbag. Carefully, she removed a small envelope that had faded with time. "I've carried this for 28 years." Claire accepted it with trembling hands. Inside was a tiny hospital identification bracelet. The name section had been left blank. Only one number remained clearly visible. Nursery 12. Wrapped around the bracelet was a folded note. Claire unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Richard Walker. "If someone finds this, please tell my daughter." Her father never stopped searching. A single tear landed on the paper. At that same moment, across the city, Evelyn unlocked the front door of Michael and Sarah Carter's home. The familiar scent of cinnamon and fresh bread filled the air. It was the smell of childhood, the smell of safety. Sarah smiled from the kitchen. "I wasn't expecting you today." Evelyn forced a smile. "I wasn't expecting me either." Michael noticed something immediately. "You've been crying." Evelyn tried to laugh. It was just a difficult day. Michael looked at Sarah, then back at Evelyn. A quiet sadness crossed his face, as though he'd spent years fearing this moment. He set down his coffee cup. Evelyn, we need to tell you something. Before another word could be spoken, the doorbell rang. 3 slow knocks. Michael froze. Sarah's smile disappeared. Neither of them moved, almost as if they already knew who was standing on the other side of the door. Back at St. Catherine's, Claire finally asked the question she had been avoiding. If Harold took the baby, how did she survive? Eleanor looked toward the rain-covered window. A faint smile crossed her face. Because someone refused to let an innocent child disappear. Claire frowned. Who? Eleanor stood slowly. Come with me. She led Claire to the hospital archives. At the very end of the room, she opened a dusty cabinet no one had touched in decades. Inside rested a single sealed file. Across the front, one handwritten name, Michael Carter. Claire stared at it. She had never heard the name before, but somehow, she knew this file would change everything. Michael Carter stared at the front door. 3 slow knocks. Not loud, not urgent, just certain. Sarah slowly placed the dish towel on the kitchen counter. For years, they had imagined this moment, prayed it would never come, and feared what it would cost if it did. Michael opened the door. Claire Walker stood quietly on the porch. Rainwater clung to her coat. In one hand, she carried Richard Walker's journal. In the other, a worn hospital file. Neither of them spoke. Michael didn't ask why she was there. He already knew. His shoulders sank. So, he whispered, you finally found us. Claire nodded. It took 28 years. Michael stepped aside. Please, come in. The house felt warm, small, lived in. Family photographs filled every wall. School portraits, birthday parties, camping trips, Christmas mornings. A little girl with scraped knees. A teenager learning to drive. A young woman in a graduation gown. Claire studied every photograph. Not because they were extraordinary, but because they were beautiful in their simplicity. This was a life. A real life. One Richard Walker had dreamed of seeing, but never could. Evelyn entered from the hallway. She smiled when she saw Claire. The smile faded almost instantly. No one looked like they had come for a friendly visit. Claire took a slow breath. I'm sorry. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances. Evelyn frowned. What happened? Claire gently placed the hospital file on the coffee table. I think this belongs to you. Michael closed his eyes. He could no longer carry the weight of silence. Evelyn, his voice trembled. There are things we've never told you. Sarah reached for her daughter's hand. We wanted to, so many times. But every time we looked at you, we saw our little girl. And we couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Evelyn looked from one parent to the other. Confusion slowly replaced calm. Losing me? Michael nodded. You came into our lives when you were only a few months old. We legally adopted you. We loved you from the very first day. Sarah smiled through tears. The first night we brought you home, you refused to sleep unless Michael held your tiny hand. Michael laughed softly. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Evelyn couldn't help smiling. Then she noticed the tears in both their eyes. The smile disappeared. You've always known, Sarah whispered. Yes. Silence settled over the room. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. The kind of silence that changes a family forever. Finally, Evelyn asked the question every child fears. "So, my whole life has been a lie?" Michael answered before anyone else could. "No, never." He moved closer. Every word came straight from his heart. "The circumstances of how you came to us, those were built on lies. But every bedtime story, every birthday candle, every scraped knee, every hug, every 'I'm proud of you,' that was real." Sarah gently brushed a tear from Evelyn's cheek. "Love doesn't become a lie just because you learn something new." Evelyn broke down. She threw her arms around both of them. For a long time, no one moved. Claire quietly looked away. Some moments are too sacred to interrupt. When the tears finally settled, Claire opened Richard's journal. "I think there's something your father wanted you to hear." She unfolded a carefully preserved letter. Richard's handwriting filled the page. Evelyn hesitated. "I don't know if I can." Michael squeezed her shoulder. "You don't have to. When you're ready." She nodded, then began to read. "My precious daughter, I don't know who raised you, but if they loved you, then they gave you the greatest gift I never could." Evelyn stopped. Her vision blurred. She looked at Michael, then Sarah. Richard continued. "If the people who raised you taught you kindness, protected your heart, and celebrated your dreams, then before you ever think about forgiving me, thank them." Michael quietly lowered his head. Sarah wept openly. Richard's next words filled the room. "A father is not only the man whose blood you carry. A father is the man who stays. If another man stayed, then honor him." The room fell silent. Even Claire struggled to continue reading. That evening, Claire prepared to leave. Before she reached the front door, Evelyn stopped her. "Did he?" She swallowed hard. "Did Richard ever stop looking?" Claire's answer came without hesitation. "No. He searched every birthday, every Christmas, every year. He hired investigators. He visited hospitals. He followed every lead. And every time someone asked why he wouldn't give up," Claire smiled sadly, "he always gave the same answer." Evelyn looked at her. Claire repeated Richard's words. "Because somewhere, my daughter is growing up believing she was forgotten. And I refuse to let that become her story." Tears rolled down Evelyn's face once more. Claire reached into her bag. She removed a tiny silver bracelet, the one Eleanor Brooks had protected for 20 years. "It's yours." Evelyn turned it over carefully. One side carried only the hospital number. The other, a single engraving. "Evelyn." Her hands began to shake. He named me?" Claire smiled. "The nurse said it was the only name your father ever wanted." Evelyn closed her fingers around the bracelet. She pressed it against her heart. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. For the first time in 20 years, the little girl Richard Walker had searched for knew she had never been abandoned. She had always been loved. She simply hadn't known it. Morning arrived quietly. For the first time in days, the rain had stopped. Sunlight slipped through the curtains of the Carter home. Everything looked peaceful. But peace has a strange way of arriving just before the hardest decisions. Evelyn hadn't slept. Richard's letter rested on the dining table. Beside it, the tiny silver bracelet. She picked it up once more. 20 years. One name. One unanswered question. Who stole her life? Across Manhattan, Benjamin Hayes gathered everyone inside Richard Walker's private library. The room looked different now. Not because anything had changed, but because no one entered it carrying illusions anymore. Claire arrived first. Daniel followed. Detective Laura Mitchell walked in carrying 2 thick evidence boxes. Finally, Evelyn stepped through the doorway. She wasn't there as Richard's daughter. She was there as an attorney, and as a woman determined to uncover the truth. Benjamin stood beside the fireplace. My friends, for weeks, we've asked the wrong question. Everyone looked at him. We've been asking who lost a child. He paused. The better question is, who profited from it? The room fell silent. Detective Mitchell placed a stack of financial records on the table. We subpoenaed Harold Whitmore's accounts. She opened the first folder. Over a period of 9 years, he received a series of unexplained cash deposits. Claire frowned. From my mother? Laura shook her head. No. That's what surprised us. She turned another page. The money came from shell companies. Daniel leaned closer. Whose shell companies? Benjamin answered quietly. Harold's. The realization struck everyone at once. Harold hadn't simply accepted money. He had created an elaborate web of fake companies, then used fear to keep collecting payments. Evelyn examined the documents. Her legal instincts took over. She reached for a second folder. Wait! Everyone turned toward her. These signatures! They're identical. Laura nodded. So? Evelyn pointed to 3 separate contracts. They're supposed to be signed years apart. But the pen pressure, the spacing, the handwriting, they're all from the same session. Claire looked puzzled. What does that mean? Evelyn closed the file. It means someone recreated decades of paperwork. All at once. Benjamin smiled faintly. Exactly. Harold hadn't preserved records. He had manufactured them. Just then, the library doors opened. 2 detectives escorted Harold Whitmore inside. His once perfect posture had disappeared. His expensive suits were gone. Age and guilt had finally caught up with him. He looked around the room. His eyes settled on Evelyn. For a brief moment, his confidence cracked. So, he murmured, they found you. Detective Mitchell placed a recorder on the table. Mr. Whitmore, you asked to make a statement. Harold nodded slowly. I did. He looked toward Margaret. She sat quietly in the corner. No designer clothes. No carefully rehearsed expression. Just a woman carrying 28 years of regret. Harold sighed. You came to me because you were afraid. Margaret whispered. Yes. You asked me to arrange a discreet adoption. Another whisper. Yes. I told you I knew people who could make it happen. Margaret nodded. I believed you. Harold lowered his eyes. I lied. The room remained silent. No one interrupted. Not even Detective Mitchell. Harold continued. I never arranged an adoption. I sold the story. I forged the documents. I erased the records. And when Richard refused to believe his daughter was gone, I realized his hope was worth more than the truth. Claire stared at him in disbelief. You blackmailed my mother. Harold nodded. 4 years. Margaret finally looked up. You told me she had died. Harold's voice broke. I know. You told me there was nothing left to save. I know. You stole my daughter. And my marriage. Harold closed his eyes. I know. Evelyn spoke for the first time. Not with anger. Not with hatred. But with quiet certainty. You didn't just steal a child. You stole birthdays. You stole Christmas mornings. You stole bedtime stories. You stole 28 years. From 2 fathers. The words landed like stones. Harold couldn't look at her, because there was nothing left to defend. Detective Mitchell stood. Harold Whitmore, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, forgery, identity falsification, extortion, and obstruction of justice. An officer stepped forward. The handcuffs clicked into place. Harold didn't resist. As he reached the doorway, he stopped. Without turning around, he asked one final question. Can a man ever repay a lifetime of damage? No one answered immediately. Then Benjamin spoke. No. A pause. But he can finally stop causing it. Harold lowered his head. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, he walked away with nothing left to hide behind. After the detectives left, only the family remained. The silence felt different now. Not heavy. Not fearful. Honest. Daniel looked at Evelyn. I spent my whole life protecting my father's legacy. He smiled sadly. I never realized. His greatest legacy was you. Evelyn shook her head gently. No. She looked toward the photographs lining the walls. His greatest legacy was that he never stopped searching. Claire reached for her sister's hand. This time, Evelyn didn't pull away. Outside, for the first time since Richard's funeral, sunlight broke through the clouds. Sometimes, justice doesn't erase the past. It simply gives the future permission to begin. Several weeks passed. The television cameras disappeared. The headlines faded. The reporters found news stories. But inside the Walker family, time had not moved nearly as quickly. Some wounds do not heal because the world stops watching. Walker Holdings released a public statement acknowledging the investigation. The company pledged millions of dollars toward programs protecting children from identity fraud and illegal adoption. Investors praised the decision. Employees applauded it. But Daniel knew something the public never would. This wasn't about repairing a company's reputation. It was about honoring a father's unfinished promise. Claire visited Richard's grave every Sunday. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she simply sat in silence. This morning, she placed a single white rose beside the headstone. I found her, Dad. A breeze stirred through the trees. For just a moment, she smiled. I think you already know. Across town, Margaret Walker lived alone. She had left the estate days earlier. The mansion had become too heavy with memories, too full of empty rooms. She rented a modest cottage overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. No servants, no security, no interviews, just quiet mornings and long nights. Every sunrise reminded her of the little girl she had watched sleeping in a hospital bassinet. Every sunset reminded her she could never return those lost years. Punishment sometimes arrives long before a courtroom ever speaks. One rainy afternoon, a knock echoed at her front door. Margaret hesitated. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, Evelyn stood quietly on the porch. Neither woman spoke. The rain fell gently between them. Margaret lowered her eyes. You don't have to do this. I know, Evelyn answered softly. I'm not here because someone asked me to come. A long silence followed. Finally, Margaret stepped aside. If you'd like, we can talk. The cottage was simple. A wooden table, a fireplace, 2 old armchairs facing the sea. Nothing about it resembled the luxury Margaret had once surrounded herself with. Evelyn noticed Richard's photograph resting on the mantel. Beside it, a tiny pair of knitted baby booties. Margaret followed her gaze. I found them in the attic. I couldn't bear to throw them away. She looked down. I didn't deserve to keep them either. They sat together, separated by only a few feet. And 20 years. Margaret broke the silence. I've rehearsed this conversation every day. But now that you're here, I don't know what to say. Evelyn looked out the window. Then don't rehearse. Just tell the truth. Margaret closed her eyes. The truth is that I was terrified. I convinced myself that losing one child was better than losing my whole family. She swallowed hard. I was wrong. No, Evelyn replied gently. You were afraid. But fear doesn't excuse cruelty. Margaret nodded. I know. I've had 28 years to learn the difference. Another silence settled between them. This one felt different. Not hostile. Just honest. Margaret reached into a drawer. She removed a faded envelope. I wanted you to have this. Evelyn opened it carefully. Inside was the first ultrasound photograph Richard had ever carried. On the back, he had written in blue ink, I can't wait to meet you. Evelyn's fingers trembled. Margaret smiled sadly. He carried it in his wallet until the day he died. Back at the Walker estate, Daniel and Claire sorted through Richard's study. Most of the documents would go to the company archives. Others, to museums. Then Daniel opened the bottom drawer of Richard's desk. Hidden beneath old tax files, he found a sealed envelope. Across the front, Richard had written, For Daniel. Inside, a single handwritten page. Son, if you're reading this, then you're trying to become the man I hoped you would be. Daniel smiled through tears. Leadership isn't measured by the fortune you inherit. It's measured by the people who feel safe because you stood between them and injustice. Daniel lowered the letter. For years, he had believed his father wanted him to protect the company. Now he understood. Richard had wanted him to protect people. That evening, Benjamin Hayes invited Evelyn to the Walker estate one final time. The mansion felt strangely peaceful. No lawyers. No investigators. No reporters. Just family. Benjamin led her to the grand staircase. Above it hung a massive Walker family portrait. Richard, Margaret, Daniel, Claire. Benjamin looked at the empty space beside Claire. Richard commissioned this painting 20 years ago. Evelyn frowned. There's an empty place. Benjamin smiled. He refused to let the artist finish it. Why? Benjamin looked toward the portrait. He said, One day, my daughter will come home. Evelyn stared at the unfinished canvas. For 20 years, an empty space had waited for her. Not because Richard knew when she would return, but because he never stopped believing she would. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She reached out, not to touch the painting, but to touch the hope behind it. Some promises outlive the people who make them. The daughter they erased. 3 months later, spring had quietly returned to New York. The trees that had stood bare through weeks of sorrow now carried fresh green leaves. Life had begun again. Not because the past had been forgotten, but because healing had finally found room to grow. The grand ballroom of the Walker estate had been transformed. The polished floors remained. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled. But the room no longer carried the weight of secrets. Instead, it welcomed children, families, social workers, judges, volunteers. A simple banner stretched across the stage. The Richard Walker Foundation for Family Restoration. Claire adjusted the microphone. Daniel greeted guests personally. Benjamin Hayes smiled from the front row. Michael and Sarah Carter sat together, holding hands. Proud, quiet, exactly where they belonged. Evelyn stood backstage. She looked at the speech in her hands, then folded it. She smiled. Some words should never be read. They should be spoken from the heart. Benjamin walked beside her. Ready? She laughed softly. I've argued cases before the highest courts. But somehow, this feels harder. Benjamin smiled. That's because this one matters most. Claire stepped to the podium. Thank you all for being here. She paused. My father built companies, but his greatest dream was never measured in dollars. It was measured in people. She looked toward Evelyn. Today, we continue that dream. Applause filled the room. Claire stepped aside. Evelyn walked onto the stage. For a moment, she simply looked around. At the faces. At Michael. At Sarah. At Daniel. At Margaret. Then she began. When I was a little girl, I believed every family began the same way. I was wrong. A few gentle smiles appeared. I've learned that families are complicated. They can be broken by fear, separated by lies, and wounded by silence. She paused. But I've also learned something even more important. She looked directly at Michael and Sarah. Love is a choice. It's choosing to stay. It's choosing to protect. It's choosing to show up. Every single day. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. Michael quietly reached for her hand. Evelyn continued. I was blessed with two fathers. One gave me life. The other taught me how to live. The room fell silent. And I was blessed with two mothers. One made a decision that changed my life forever. She turned toward Margaret. The other spent 20 years making sure I never doubted I was loved. Margaret lowered her head. Sarah wept openly. Evelyn smiled gently. If this story teaches us anything, it's that the truth may arrive late, but it is never too late to choose love. The audience rose to its feet. Not because of a fortune, not because of a famous family, but because hope has a way of moving people. After the ceremony, children laughed across the estate gardens. Families embraced. Volunteers welcomed parents searching for answers. The Walker estate had become something Richard would have treasured. A place where broken stories could begin again. Later that evening, Evelyn drove to a quiet cemetery on the edge of the city. She carried a small bouquet of white lilies, the same flowers that had surrounded Richard's casket. She knelt beside his grave. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, she smiled. Hi, Dad. A gentle breeze stirred through the trees. I wish we'd had more than 11 minutes. Her voice trembled. But thank you for never giving up on me. She carefully placed the tiny silver bracelet on the headstone. I don't need this anymore. She looked toward the sunset. Because I know who I am. She stood, then added quietly. And I know where I belong. As she turned away, the camera lingered on Richard's headstone. Beside the flowers rested the bracelet, no longer a symbol of loss, but of a promise fulfilled. Some people inherit wealth, some inherit power, and some inherit the truth. Richard Walker never lived to see the daughter he searched for, but he left behind something greater than an inheritance. He left behind hope, because love does not end when a heartbeat stops. It endures, in the promises we keep, in the lives we restore, and in the courage to tell the truth, no matter how long it has been buried. Sometimes, home is not the place where your story begins. Home is the place where love never stopped waiting. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. What truly makes a family, blood or love? If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Awesome Tales for more unforgettable stories of hope, sacrifice, mystery, and redemption. Until next time, take care of the people you love, because tomorrow is never promised.